Many Americans remain unaware of the nation's true history. On one hand, America is seen as charitable and peace-loving. The belief that the founders intended the country to be a Christian nation contributes to this perception. Yet, its darker origins, rooted in mystical beliefs and esoteric traditions, are often overlooked. It's time to shine a light on America's occultic roots. Let's begin by reading some excerpts from this Time article entitled America's Forgotten Occultic Origins. The article begins by talking about the Puritan ship called Arbella. It was a ship on which Massachusetts Bay Colony's Governor John Winthrop delivered a sermon entitled A Model of Christian Charity. He declared that America was to be a city on a hill. Winthrop's invocation was interpreted as a foundational text of American identity. Figures on both the right and left, from Ronald Reagan to John F. Kennedy, have long quoted Winthrop. His invocation in the sermon conceived as one of the earliest and most potent expressions of American exceptionality, so much so that the governor is retroactively understood as a kind of de facto founding father. But alongside the governor was his 24-year-old son, John Winthrop the Younger, who was very different from his father. He had in his possession a set of books he described as a hogshead of ancient papers of value, works written by the notorious English alchemist, necromancer, and occultist John Dee. John Dee was a magician and court astrologer to Elizabeth I. He's also known for his supposed communications with angels in an esoteric tongue called Enochian. Now, if you remember, we talked about Jack Parsons in the last session. He also used this Enochian language during his ritual to manifest an evil entity called Babylon. Is this just a coincidence? I think we know the answer to that one. It says, like his father, Winthrop would have prominent political roles, despite dabbling in the same angelic communications as did John Dee. It says, while Connecticut was founded by draconian theocrats, Winthrop helped reform it into a relatively tolerant settlement that banned the execution of witches a generation before the Salem witch trials. Winthrop also had necromantic interests. For those who are not familiar with that, necromancers talk to the dead. It says he didn't try to hide this. To the contrary, the study of magic and the esoteric served as a basis for Winthrop's empathetic liberal governance that exemplifies not just the head of enlightenment and the heart of evangelism, but also the spirit of occultism. You all, this is saying that he blended his Christian beliefs with occultism, and that is the point of this message. America is a nation with two faces. It's as though the nation is suffering from dissociative identity disorder. It was previously known as split personality disorder. If America was a person, it would be diagnosed with this dissociative condition, because it can only seem to remember the glorious parts of its past. But when it comes to remembering the crimes against our people and the Native Americans, the slate has been wiped clean. Let's look at this from Center of Excellence regarding split personality disorders. It says, The term split personality disorder is commonly used to describe what medical professionals refer to as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. This condition is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct personality states, or identities within a single person, each with its own way of interacting with the world. These personalities may have their own names, histories, and mannerisms, making them distinct from the person's primary identity. Is this not America? You have the preacher giving a sermon about the nation being the Christian city on the hill, while his son is using witchcraft to govern a city. He uses the same occult knowledge that the court astrologer to Elizabeth I uses. How can we not see the connection? Both aspects of the two-faced or schizophrenic character of America are real. So let's look at this journal article to find out more about John Dee and his influence on America's history. It says, while John Dee was a person who made such huge contributions to the evolution of science and technology as a natural philosopher, that he was extolled as the foremost scholar of the Elizabethan era, he devoted the last years of his life to engaging in conversations with angels and spirits through a magical technique known as scrying, which enables visions to be had with the use of a crystal ball. So Dee was engaged in two traditional scrying techniques consisting of catoptromantia and crystallomantia, and he used a black obsidian mirror with the former to acquire visions concerning the future, and a crystal ball with the latter to obtain information by summoning angels and spirits. What are we talking about here? Witchcraft. We're talking about a wizard, a sorcerer. Let's go on. This information about John Dee comes from Historic Mysteries. It's entitled Enochian, John Dee, Magic and the Language of God. It says Dee was a strong believer in the existence of hidden knowledge and sought to unravel the world and all its mysteries through his magical practices. To Dee, magic was a means to access higher realms of understanding and communicate with supernatural beings. Listen to this. He was a Christian, though, as well, and believed he could use magic to communicate with the angels themselves. Usually showing an interest in such things during this time period would have been incredibly dangerous, but Dee's expertise in mathematics and astrology lent an air of credibility to his pursuits, making him a respected figure in his time. Do you see the duality here? This is what we talked about on the live session this past week. There is a pretense of godliness, but when you look at the root, you see devil worship. Now, here is a tool used by occultists that most of us would have never considered, the almanac. Let's look at this journal article from Penn State Libraries entitled Almanacs and the Disenchantment of Early America. It says, when Connecticut minister Ezra Stiles pondered the fate of magic and the occult in 1773, he found them in a state of terminal decay. Now, he's a minister. And let's also remember that Winthrop the Younger received a commission to found a colony where? In Connecticut. It says, the system is broken up, he wrote, the vessel of sorcery shipwreck, and only some shattered planks and pieces disjoined floating and scattered on the ocean of human activity and bustle. Many observers shared Styles' sentiments. So these folks were upset when the use of magic began to decline. Let's just say this, it didn't decline, it went underground. The nation wanted the world to believe that they were a godly nation, a Christian nation, and they couldn't have the rest of the world believing that they were a bunch of witches and warlocks, now could they? Again, we're talking about the two faces of America. The article goes on to say, almanac makers, the most prominent public defenders of astrology in 18th century America, voiced similar complaints about the declining interest in the occult. Nathaniel Ames, the most popular New England almanac author in the decades leading to the Revolution, lamented as early as 1729 that the sublime sons of the art, adepts in the occult, spring up so thinly, scarce, 1 in 100. In 1753, Ames felt obliged to provide a key to astronomical symbols, explaining that they were not understood by my younger readers. Almanac makers like Ames adapted their texts to declining astronomical literacy and often simplified the treatment of astrology. Though astrological learning was ebbing, contemporary observers agreed that magical practices were far from extinct. Even the harshest critics of the occult acknowledged that it retained a core of support among the common people. The article goes on to say scholars emphasize the continuity between magical practices in the 18th century and that of earlier times. Over the past 20 years, scholars have uncovered much new evidence on the abundance of popular magic practices in the 18th century. There has been extensive new documentation of the role of cunning men and women, fortune tellers, alleged witches, treasure hunters, dream interpreters, and folk healers. Richard Godbeer typifies recent scholarship when he writes that while educated New Englanders learned to speak and think in the language of the High Enlightenment, most ordinary folk were unaffected by new intellectual currents and continued to see the world as an enchanted place filled with occult forces. John Butler labels the bifurcation of learned and popular attitudes toward the occult as the folklorization of magic. Butler writes that magic survived among the largely illiterate and poor segments of European and American society, while often disappearing from elite and literate segments of society. So it goes on to tell us that one of the best places to witness the changing popular reception of the occult and magic is within the pages of the early American almanac. For one thing, as a staple of the colonial press from its beginnings in Massachusetts in 1639, almanacs form a particularly abundant print source. By 1750, over 50 separate almanacs appeared in the colonies annually. By 1800, the number of different almanacs printed annually exceeded 125. Now this is important. It says the almanac was also a vehicle of education. But as John Butler noted, the almanac was also the main print source for disseminating occultism in early America. So they used the almanac for many things. One in particular was to understand what was happening with the weather especially on specific days. This historic UK article entitled Thunder and Lightning, Historically Frightening, says 16th century almanacs reveal the way in which weather and the calendar were used to predict death and disaster in the Tudor period. It says the weather on specific days, such as Christmas Day, could be used to gauge the fates of those around you for the upcoming year. Wind on this day was a particularly bad omen, predicting the death of cattle if appearing at sunrise, daily sickness if at midday, and death of kings and lords if wind was felt at sunset. Now, regarding the 12 days of Christmas, it says there was also a belief that the 12 days of Christmas correlated to the 12 months of the year, and therefore the weather on each of these days would provide a prediction for the matching month. For example, if the sun shone on Christmas Day, then this could signify a peaceful start of the year. However, if the day was windy, then January would bring the death of a great man. It goes on to say, as well as weather being utilized to predict the year, the day of the week on which New Year's Day fell was considered an omen for the following 12 months. These predictions typically focused on the weather, harvests, in particular, how much fruit, wine, corn, and honey there would be, and who was likely to fall on hard times. Now we're going to shift just a bit to dig into some information found in the digital collections in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. And you're going to see that there is an image presented to the public to make it seem like this is a godly Christian nation. But behind the scenes, the occultic roots serve as the foundation. The collection contains a book by a man named Robert Hieronymus, and he delves into the often overlooked connections between America's founding fathers and various esoteric orders, including the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians. So Hieronymus argues that these affiliations significantly influenced the formation of the United States, shaping its foundational documents and symbols, particularly the Great Seal. He says this influence extends beyond historical context and resonates in various aspects of modern society, including financial platforms in India. He has this image in the book showing that America's founding fathers were indeed involved in secret societies. You see George Washington, he was a Freemason. Benjamin Franklin was a Freemason, and Thomas Jefferson was a Rosicrucian. So the author, Bob Hieronymus, is the co-founder of AUM Savitria New Morning School and philosopher whose central interest is in the effect on consciousness of two-dimensional forms. Well, what's that? Two-dimensional forms in philosophy refers to a theory in semantics that distinguishes between two aspects of meaning. For example, you have the primary intention of the word, and that's the sense of the word. And then there's the secondary intention, which is the referent of the word. It's the thing that a symbol really stands for. So this is the reason for his book. He's going to expose the true meaning of the American symbols. The puppet masters try to hide the esoteric meanings. Now, some of the images may be hard to see. I tried to enlarge them, but try doing a Google search for the ones that are not as clear. Let's begin with his statement regarding the occult origins of the Great Seal. He says there exists a nebulous reference to an unknown person who came to Philadelphia and presented the reverse of the Great Seal as we know it today to one of the committee members. If such a person did appear, traditional history makes no mention of it. However, If its documentation was lost or destroyed, the true origin of the Great Seal's reverse will never be known. A second and equally mysterious account of the origin of both obverse and reverse of the Great Seal is found in Flying Saucers in the Bible by Virginia Brasington. It states, the Continental Congress had asked Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams to arrange for a seal for the United States of America. None of the designs they created or which were submitted to them were suitable. Fairly late at night, after working on the project all day, Jefferson walked out into the cool night air of the garden to clear his mind. In a few minutes he rushed back into the room, crying jubilantly, "I have it! I have it!" Indeed, he did have some plans in his hands. They were the plans showing the Great Seal as we know it today. Asked how he got the plans, Jefferson told a strange story. A man approached him wearing a black cloak that practically covered him, face and all, and told him that he, the stranger, knew they were trying to devise a seal, and that he had a design which was appropriate and meaningful. He says there were two secret societies that were dominant in their influence on the founders, Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians. They may have cooperated with one another to achieve common goals during the discovery and colonization of America. Freemasonry promoted philanthropy, religious liberty, and cosmopolitanism, while the Rosicrucians studied the Kabbalah, alchemy, and magic, and were the guardians of the Esoteric tradition, interpreters of the light of the Gospels, and physicians of bodies, souls, and societies. Freemasonry was exoteric Rosicrucianism. He says there is yet a third secret society to which some of the founders may have belonged. This society was called the Illuminati and was founded in Bavaria on May 1st, 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. This organization was sworn to remove all heads of church and state. It was short-lived as an exoteric organized force and supposedly disintegrated in 1786. Reliable information concerning the Illuminati is almost non-existent. So the author goes on to talk about the eye in the triangle on the back of the dollar bill. You can see it here on the apron that Benjamin Franklin is wearing. He says the committee of 1782 stated that the eye in the triangle, along with the two mottos, alluded to the many signal interpositions or interventions of Providence in favor of the Americans. And this is why you hear folks saying it's called the Eye of Providence. So there are some who are trying to downplay any Masonic connections to this eye in the triangle. But the author says there is convincing proof of its Masonic implications in the two letters of Henry Wallace. Let's look at one of those letters. So Henry A. Wallace is writing to Mr. Lee. It says, "Your letter on January 31st was delayed by the strike. The story of how the reverse side of the seal of the United States was placed on the dollar bill is as follows. In 1934, when I was Secretary of Agriculture, I was waiting in the outer office of Secretary Hull, and as I waited, I amused myself by picking up a State Department publication which was on a stand there entitled The History of the Seal of the United States. Turning to page 53, I noted the colored reproduction of the reverse side of the seal. The Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum impressed me as meaning the New Deal of the ages. Therefore, I took the publication to President Roosevelt and suggested a coin be put out with the obverse and reverse sides of the seal. Roosevelt, as he looked at colored reproduction of the seal, was first struck with the representation of the all-seeing eye, a Masonic representation of the great architect of the universe. Next, he was impressed with the idea that the foundation for the new order of the ages had been laid in 1776, but that it would be completed only under the eye of the great architect. Roosevelt, like myself, was a 32nd degree Mason. He suggests that the seal be put on the dollar bill rather than a coin, and took the matter up with the Secretary of the Treasury. It is also said that the components of the eye and the triangle also have occult significance. The triangle has been used by the Rosicrucians as the basis of a law which they refer to as the law of the triangle. In short, if something exists, a thesis, its opposite must also exist, antithesis, and it is the merging of the opposites that forms the synthesis and the final leg of the triangle. You also see a date on the bottom of the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. He says the date or inscription found at the bottom of the Great Pyramid reads 1776. It was Thomas Jefferson who suggested the date, and his obvious reason for doing so was its importance in the foundation of the Republic. The followers of the John Birch Society, however, believe it to be the date that Adam Weishaupt founded the Illuminati, May 1st, 1776. It says this is one of the proofs the Birchers offer when they refer to the final accepted sign for the reverse side of the Great Seal as the symbol of the Illuminati. It says it is believed by some that 1776 was the advent of the Aquarian Age, and that America was to be an example of the kind of altruism and brotherhood that was to manifest during the Aquarian Age. Whether 1776 was the beginning of the new age or not, the occult tradition puts a great deal of emphasis on the last 25 years of any century. The founding of America occurred during the last quarter of the 18th century, and the last quarter of any century is traditionally the most potent period within that 100-year period. It is true that the last 25 years of the 18th century were successful in establishing the first nation whose philosophy was to encompass the brotherhood of man and recognize the fatherhood of God. This should serve as a reminder that as America nears its 200th birthday, we're also entering the last 25 years of the 20th century, the last 25 years of a millennium, and to some, the last 25 years of a bimillennium or the Piscean Age, heralding the coming of the new age of Aquarius. When considering the above, it should become evident that we are beginning a time period in which the growth of the esoteric or occult tradition will become considerably magnified. It would appear that such a trend is occurring and that it is likely to continue. Now he's going to talk about the stars. And just FYI, I'm not going to cover all of the symbols he mentioned in the book. You're certainly welcome to read the online copy. But take a look at the eagle and look at what is above its head. Now he says, before proceeding to a deeper interpretation of the symbolism of 5 and 6-pointed stars, we should examine these symbols in light of the science of heraldry. In heraldry, there are two kinds of stars used for armorial bearings. The first is the 5-pointed star called the mullet, and it is actually the spur found on boots. It is usually a negative shape in that it is cut out or recessed in the bearing. The 6-pointed star is called the étoile, that's the French word for it, and is the correct star used to represent the heavens. Therefore, when one refers to a star in heraldry, one is referring to the étoile or 6-pointed star. This was important to William Barton, a heraldist, because the first Great Seal of 1782 carried in its new constellation 13 6-pointed stars, which is the only acceptable method by which 13 heavenly stars could be symbolized. However, the designs of the Great Seal from 1841 onward carry in the new constellation 13 5-pointed stars, or mullets, which, as previously cited, are boot spurs and therefore incorrect. So he says, from the occult point of view, we learn, to the Rosicrucian, the triangle is the symbol of perfection. It depicts the unity of two polarities of a different nature, resulting in a manifestation. All through nature, whether in the macrocosm or the microcosm world, the law of duality exists. Keep that word in mind. And when these opposites are brought together, a creation results, whether it be a material, spiritual, organic, or inorganic creation. The interlaced triangles represent the perfection of the law of duality on both the material and spiritual planes. He goes on to say the 6-pointed star is a symbol for the macrocosm of the great world, the universe. The upright triangle is the material world. The inverted triangle is the divine world, or as above, so below. One is the mirror image of the other. The 6-pointed star is related to the number 6, which is harmony, and also man's sixth sense, clairvoyance. Clairvoyance can be defined as the result of harmony between man and God. The 6-pointed star contains 13 5-pointed stars. The 5-pointed star, or pentacle, is a symbol of man and his 5 senses, overcoming the 4 elements of air, earth, fire, and water. It has been called the perfected man and was used by the Pythagorean school to signify health and hence harmony. Thus 13 stars would mean that the regeneration of man eventuates in the macrocosm. Man therefore becomes a god through a process of regeneration. Is this not what they're doing right now with AI? They are trying to transcend. So it says the 6-pointed star equals the macrocosm, or the world of God. The 5-pointed star equals the microcosm, or the world of man. When microcosm equals macrocosm, and the 5-pointed star equals the 6-pointed star, we have God-man, or Christos. Thus the 6-pointed star, or interlocked triangles, represents the perfection of harmony between the celestial and the terrestrial spheres of existence. We will wrap up with the eagle. It says the dominant symbol on the great seals of verse is the American bald eagle. Benjamin Franklin opposed the choice of the eagle for the great seal. As a matter of fact, he thought at first that it was a wild turkey. Some believe that Franklin was really viewing a phoenix and not an eagle. It is interesting to note that one of William Barton's early designs for the Great Seal did include a phoenix. The phoenix appeared in 1778 on colonial paper money. Some historians have likened the eagle found on the official seal of 1782 to the phoenix, in that they both have long necks and tufts of feathers. The phoenix is the legendary bird that is reborn from its ashes every 500 years. It is important to note that both the eagle and the phoenix have been used for symbols of rebirth and regeneration in numerous secret societies, including both the Masons and the Rosicrucians. To the secret societies, the use of the bald eagle was symbolic. For initiates in the esoteric schools shave their heads to symbolize direct contact with divine power above. Regeneration to such secret societies expressed itself in the wealth of personal inclination and the expressed desire to make the divine will manifest. Freemasonry is linked to the use of the eagle through its being found in the Jewel of the Rose-Croix Decree and its emphasis on the control and sublimation of personal ambition, eventuating in spiritual vision. So there are various suggestions for why this eagle was chosen, in addition to it being a symbol of regeneration. But this one stands out. The author says, continuing our thoughts along these lines, we come to an ancient science called uranology that suggests another possibility concerning the eagle's origins. This system of knowledge suggests a relationship between the celestial and terrestrial spheres. So Manlius suggests that the constellations are a celestial map of the terrestrial Earth. It says the constellations are distributed according to the land and water distribution of the Earth's surface. The celestial river corresponds with the terrestrial Nile. One ingenious author worked with the idea and remarks the extraordinary coincidence that in many cases animals which are emblematically associated with the various nations are located in the heavens above the continents where the nations flourish. They call this the system the key to the heavens clock. So basically it says if you take a map of the stars and place it over a map of the Earth with the pole star resting over the North Pole, you'll have a heavenly clock making one complete revolution daily. It says we turn to our heavenly clock and we find when Kema are over the pyramid in the land of Kim, that the great bear falls over Russia. The head of Draco the dragon falls over China. And listen to this. It says the eagle falls over the United States. And nearly all the wings known to astronomy are in the heavens above America. And when we understand this, a flood of light is poured over the history and mythology of the zodiac, and there are many other correspondences of equal or greater significance. So it says, unfortunately, William Barton and Charles Thomson, in their remarks and explanations, did not attempt to shed any light on the meaning of the American eagle. So we are left to our own resources and imagination as to its prime origin and meaning. So the author is asking this question: was this an oversight or done intentionally? So when you understand that the Great Seal of the United States represents the nation's identity and values, you see that at its core, this nation has two parts. It contains a range of oppositions of good and evil. There is a projected image in conflict with its history of oppression and barbarism. It's also a nation incapable of righting its wrongs. Why? Because it will not acknowledge those wrongs, much like its present leader. How can there be repentance or restoration when you will not confess your sins, turn, and repent? That's the definition of a reprobate. So we will end it here. If this message has been a blessing to you, please like and share. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.